Praise the Lord. I am going to continue. I've learned some things. I'm still learning things. I'm going to go to the book of Hebrews. We're going to start off there. Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews is close to the back of the Bible. There's only a few books like James and 1st and 2nd Peter and 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and then it's the end of the book. Then it's Revelation. Praise the Lord. Anyways, I'm going to start off in Hebrews chapter 12, and I'm going to start with verse 14. It says, "Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. Looking carefully, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God." If we fall short of the grace of God, "and lest any root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by that many become defiled." So we're looking carefully lest we should fall short of the grace of God, but we're looking carefully also lest any root of bitterness springs up and cause trouble, and by this many are defiled. There's a day, and I've just been understanding more about a root of bitterness and judgment and the things that we do. God's judgment can come on us because of our actions, whether we realize it or not, because God's not mocked. Whatever you sow, that shall you also reap. Okay, so we want to pursue peace with all people and holiness, because if we don't, it says we're not going to see the Lord. And also being cautious that we don't fall short of the grace of God. And to fall short of the grace of God means that you're walking in the grace of God, circumstances happen, and you decide to give up. Or it's like a runner that's running a race, and he sees the finish line and he quits. So much of the time, the biggest troubles we have may come right before the victory. And a lot of times we give up. We decide we're going to do what we want to do and maybe not what God wants us to do. We need to maintain grace in our lives. And in that same chapter, down in verse 28, it says, "Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken," which is the kingdom of heaven. That's why the Lord taught him to pray, "Thy will be done. Thy kingdom come." We are receiving this kingdom which cannot be shaken. It is never going to be shaken. "Let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear." Okay, so we're receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken. Thereby we want to have grace that we can serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. It almost implies that without the proper amount of grace, it's really hard to serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear, because we let too many other things get in our way. But it's amazing to me how much of grace is not taught. I'm receiving a kingdom, therefore I need to have this grace that I can serve God the way He wants me to, acceptably, with awe, with reverence for Him and godly fear. Grace is supposed to be that important in our lives. And there's a verse in Titus 2:11 and 12 that I found fascinating. Titus is just kind of like the book before Hebrews. So in Titus chapter 2, it says this, "For the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men." That doesn't mean that everyone's accepted salvation. It just means that God's grace is available for anybody that wants to accept it. So the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men. I just got to pause there because it's like, for the grace of God that brings salvation, for by grace are you saved through faith. Now it was the work of Christ that done it. But if you put those two verses together, this verse and the verse in Ephesians where it says, for by grace are you saved, not by faith, lest any man should boast, we're saved by grace. And the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men. Not that everyone accepts it, but you see the importance of grace. God's grace is what brings us, and is a catalytic change that changes our hearts and spirits when we accept the Lord. And here it says, here's what this grace is doing according to these verses. Teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present age. Grace is to be a teacher to us in how we are to live. According to this verse and according to Hebrews 28, that we are to, grace will teach us that denying ungodliness and worldly interference, lust is not always sexual. It can be the lust for power, money, many, many things. But because all of those relate to us, to this world. So we deny these worldly lusts and ungodliness, and we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present age. And again in Hebrews it says, since receiving a kingdom cannot be shaken, then we should have grace by which, by the grace of God, we can serve Him acceptably with reverence and godly fear. And I want to go back to verse 15 of Hebrews 12, where it says, looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and thus many become defiled. I've been on this journey learning about captivities and the things that we need to cleanse out of our lives. And I'm sad to report that most religious organizations want people to get saved, and they think that's going to be a great step and it's going to solve all their problems. You know, the problem is you're the same person inside that you were before you accepted the Lord, and sometimes the Lord wants to do some cleansing. Or there may be wounds and trauma and hurt that need to be dealt with. And I can't speak for anybody else, but I can only speak for me. Like I think the last Sunday that I talked about that I've asked the Lord in the last 6 months, why do I have such a problem worshiping? Do I really worship you? Do I really worship you? I can praise, I can give you thanks. And the Lord started showing me that the only time that I really worshiped was singing in the Spirit. I could worship God when I was singing in the Spirit. And so I've been asking God to show me why I can't worship, why it's been so hard for me to worship. And He showed me a situation that I allowed bitterness in my life to come in, and I judged the teacher for doing things to me. But I had to reap the root, I had to reap the outcome of that. Okay, I'll just tell you a story so you get better acquainted with what I'm talking about, okay? I was in music class probably the first month of the 8th grade year. I had a music teacher, she asked me a question, and she'd come to that school when I was in the 5th grade. She didn't like me then, she didn't like me anymore in the 8th grade. She asked me a question, I didn't have an answer, so I didn't say anything. So this teacher just goes, spends half the class berating me, yelling. And at that time, because of everything else in my life, I would just shut down. It's like my brain would just click off. And the only way I can describe it, it would be like if you've ever walked in real muddy ground where your feet get stuck in the mud and it's hard to pick them up, and it's, like you can't hardly walk because it's such a struggle to do that. That's the way my brain would function. It's like I would have to almost try to concentrate as hard as I could to even think a thought. It's just like it's just a blackness. And I later learned that from Dr. Carolyn Leaf that that's exactly what happens. The chemicals in your brain actually slow down everything in your brain so that you cannot think properly. So this teacher's yelling at me, and then she asked me that question again. But first she said, when I ask you a question, you give me an answer. I want you to say, and I can still remember what she said, I want you to say, yes ma'am, no ma'am, thank you, something, please. She asked me the question again. There was only one thought in my mind, and that was her last statement. And she said, when I ask you a question, I want you to give me an answer. I want you to say, yes ma'am, no ma'am, thank you, something, please. So when she asked me a question again, I said, yes ma'am, no ma'am, thank you, something, please, because I didn't have any answer for her. So for the rest of the year, I got to go in the nurse's little first aid room and sit there. I couldn't have any books with me. I couldn't bring anything to read. I just was supposed to sit there and think about how bad I was. Every week for the rest of that year, that's where I had to go. And then, without realizing it, because that teacher didn't understand my mental condition or what I was really, what I go through, and what she did was painful, hurtful, and I would sit there and think about it, and it caused this bitter root judgment. But I never thought about it. It was in my metacognitive or my subconscious mind where I didn't think about it. But then the Lord revealed to me this was an area of captivity in my mind that I had to go get free from. Forgive that teacher. But for most of my life, I felt I was too bad to worship. And even though I couldn't think about it consciously, that was still controlling that part of my life. Until I just gave it to the Lord and He set me free. And I can worship now. So there's this bitter root that can kind of spring up because we get angry and we make a judgment against someone. God says in Galatians that God, He's not mocked. Whatever you sow, that you're going to reap. Some people want to refer that to karma, and karma is really just an application of this verse. God's not mocked. You're going to receive what you sow. So I was so angry and hurt over that teacher that it affected me. Probably didn't affect her at all. She thought she was doing what was right. But it affected me. And then this week, there have been two other areas of my life that I've had to face myself. One of them had to do with what I thought I was worth, which was almost nothing. Because there'd been enough situations and circumstances that the Lord showed me this cage, and I was in it. But I was big. I was like 15 foot tall because I had allowed so many thoughts to keep reinforcing what I believed or was proving to me that I wasn't worth much or anything. So He unlocks the cage, and it's like, and I can't explain this, but I was big and I think it was because I had allowed everything in my life almost to reinforce the facts that I don't have much value. I said, God, I don't know what to do here. So I went up and hugged me around the thighs because he was so big. That's all the taller I was. And said, I'm sorry that you had to go through all this, that you believed all these lies. And this figure shrank down until about the size of a 8 or 9-year-old boy. The cage disappeared. And the father said, now I want to show you something. And I watched that boy grow into a warrior, 15 to 20 feet tall, big muscles, just in armor, big sword. A mighty warrior of God. And God says, that's your worth to me. That's what you're worth to me. Your worth is not what you've been told. Your worth is what I see you to be. And I said, Lord, I know I'm not there. You're going to have to help me grow into that. And then this figure had armor, and it was just the breastplate, it was magnificent. And then the breastplate cracked open a little bit, and there was nothing but white light coming out. Because he's the light of the world, and he was in me. And he has to be in me if I'm going to fulfill that, what he thinks I'm worth to him. Then there was another cage, about the same size, but it was not standing up, it was laying down. Can't say that I understand all these things. And I said, Lord, what is this? Because I felt like I was constantly being attacked, even while I was laying in this cage. And he said, that's all the lies you've believed about not only didn't have much worth. This was the fact that I believed I would never really be loved. So situations, relationships, it seems like everything in my life kept proving to me two things: that I'm not really worthy and that no one's ever going to love me. So he opened the cage. He said, God, I don't know what to do. So I just walked over and put my hand on the chest of the figure that was representing all of the lies that I believed, and said, I'm sorry that I didn't know better, that I didn't do this sooner, but I love you. And I felt like the Father reached out his hand and put it on the chest of that figure and said, I love you too. And everything just disappeared. I don't know that I'm totally healed from all of that, but it was amazing to realize how much junk I've carried in my life. And most of the time just ignoring it and trying to prove that I'm worth something, or that I'm worthy to be loved also. But when we have these bitter root judgments, because I was bitter against all the people that were telling me who I was and what I would be and what I wasn't going to be, and I believed all these lies, it allowed that to grow and become a controlling factor in my life. And I wondered, as I was sitting here this morning, the Lord brought to mind the story about Jesus when he went to the pool of Bethesda, where an angel stirred the water once a year, and whoever stepped into the water was miraculously healed of everything that was wrong with them. And there's a man that had been laying there for 38 years. And out of all the people there, out of all the wounded, sick, lame, whatever, Jesus went to this one man. And I wonder if his mindset was such that he allowed his thinking to control his life. And Jesus says, do you want to be made whole? He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He said, well, there's nobody to help me. When I'm trying to get into the pool, someone steps in front of me. So was he upset about all the people that hadn't helped him in his life? And that became a controlling factor that kept him bound? I don't know. But I just think it's interesting the different ways that Jesus healed. So what did Jesus say to him? Take up your bed, carry it around, walk, and go home. Maybe not exactly those words, but take up your bed and walk. He wasn't saying, well, I understand you've been hurt and you got all these problems. No, he said, I'm going to wipe all those out in 1 second. Just like when the Father put his hand on that one figure, it disappeared. And if you read the story about Jesus and the disciples, he sent the disciples ahead in a boat, going over to the other side, and that's when he comes walking on the water at night to them. In each of the Gospels, there's something different, a different aspect of the story, because there's 4 immediatelys in that story. The first one, I think, was when they were afraid, and immediately Jesus says, don't be afraid, it's me. Well, it's kind of unusual to see someone walking across the water. It's a storm. And you have to realize that the Sea of Galilee, if you were to equate that, it's like from this road here, which is 9, over to 13 in Coverstone, which is about 13 miles. And it's from 30 down to 14, which is about 6 miles. That's about the size of the lake. So if they were going across the narrowest part, they were 3 miles offshore. And Jesus comes walking. I don't know about you, but if I see someone walking on water, it's probably going to freak me out too. And Jesus immediately said, fine, don't be afraid. Peter said, if it's you, then tell me to come out and walk on water with you. He said, come. So Peter starts walking on water. He's thinking, hey, this is pretty cool. I'm walking on water. And then he looked around and saw all the storm and there's everything else. And he started to think. When we start to think, there's an immediately that Jesus has, that he reaches out his hand, and if we're willing, and immediately, Jesus was about, according to the scriptures, about 100 yards off. He was still close enough they could see, maybe 50 yards off, but immediately, when Peter started to sink, immediately Jesus reached down and pulled him up, and immediately they were in the boat, and immediately the storm ceased, and immediately they were on the other side, and that 3 miles just disappeared. They were immediately on the other side. Jesus is the immediately God. When we need him, when we really need him, immediately he'll be there. All we have to do is ask. And in the last of September, the 1st of October, I was really excited about understanding to a greater degree when Jesus stood on the Feast of Tabernacles and said, if anyone thirsts, let him come unto me. And out of his innermost being will flow rivers of living water. And I just think that's amazing, that it's the same verbiage. The living water is the verb form of the river of the water of life that flows out from the throne in the temple of God in Revelation 22. And there it gives life to trees that bring forth a different fruit every month. Leaves are for the healing of the nation. Whoever steps in the water is going to be healed. That's what we should have flowing out of us. And I'm saying, God, I want to have your living water flowing out of me. And since then, my life's been hell. And I'm thinking, God, I'm so excited about living water. Why? And he said, well, I've given you hints of this before, but the temple has to be cleansed before living water can flow out of it. So he gave me spiritual attacks, which taught me about the poison in my spirit and different things. And so that every time, like if I go and I have all of these doubts about my worth, not only do I need to be delivered from that, but I also need to get rid of the poison in my spirit that still affects me. And when I think that I'm incapable of being loved, that's also a poison in my spirit. Not only do I need to be set free, but I need also to cleanse this poison out of my spirit. And I thought, okay, Lord, this is not written in like 1 John 21 or 41, where it says, okay, when you get hurt, there's poison in your spirit, so you got to deal with it. But he showed me how real it was. And when I got rid of the poison from the spiritual attack I had on October 17th, it was such a blessing and such a relief in my life. But there's all this residue of poison that we don't realize. And most of the time, I've been in a lot of churches and no one's ever told me these things. That I can actually be cleansed from all these old wounds, be delivered from those things, but also to cleanse my spirit and get rid of the poison that's accumulated in my spirit. Because there's enough verses that says, like, the poison of asp is under their lips, and they sharpen their tongue as serpents' fangs. Well, why is all that written? It's written because it'll put poison in you. That's why the poison of asp is under the lips, because they're going to be speaking it. And if they're speaking it to us, it's going to put poison in our spirits that we need to be set free from. I've been on this journey of looking at my life and seeing areas of captivity and getting rid of the poison and the effects of the things that I've carried most of my life. And it's like, God, why didn't you show me this right after I got saved? Then my life might have been easier. But he chose to do it his way. And that's okay. And the thing about a bitter root is, when we judge other people, when we judge our parents for not being better to us, or people in relationships that walk away, if we allow that bitterness to be there, it's going to manifest itself in a repetitive pattern until we deal with it. All I can say is I'm on this journey, and hopefully I'm getting better and getting healed. So I hope this has meant something to someone else, because it's changed me. Any questions, any comments?